So kindly put off your microphones. Kritika, kindly put off your microphone, please. Kritika,
Glory Gasper.
Yeah,
Please,
good evening.
please, good evening. Thanks for joining us. Kindly keep your microphone off for some time, please.
Yeah, sure, sure.
Thank you.
yeah, thank you so much, ma'am. I think Zanita ma'am, we can start welcoming Sharada as
Yeah,
we go
okay.
on with the
I don't
participants
see
and we'll just move
Sharada.
ahead.
I don't
Ma'am,
see
Sharada is
Sharada.
good. It's okay. She's there.
Okay.
She's visible to the participants.
Maybe, yeah. Kamlaveni,
Okay, ma'am, but you are audible and you're clear.
okay.
You can go ahead.
Okay. So, good evening to all the participants who've taken your time to join us. A warm welcome to our second day of our webinar. So today's resource person is Sharada Kalyanam. She is a PhD student of Oregon State University, Corvallis, USA. So Sharada, hi, thanks for joining us. Good to have you on board. Are you there? Can you hear
Yes,
me?
thank you. It's so good to be here.
Yes. I think you have the floor open for you. You can feel free and share your details. First, introduce yourself and give just a short preload to your talk and go ahead. The floor is yours. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Saneta. Thank you, Dr. Kamalaveni. It's really exciting to be here. My name is Sharda Kalyanam, and I am a second year PhD student in Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at Oregon State University. And first of all, I want to thank the Department of Women's Studies at University for this wonderful opportunity. And I also want to start sharing my screen with all of you. Uh, Hold on 1 second. Uh, my screen should be visible to all of you now. Um, you're able to see it, right? My slides? All right.
Yes, ma'am, we can see.
Okay. Before I start, I want to read a land acknowledgement. I make this, which is on the traditional lands of, sorry, 1 second. Something here.
Ma'am, sorry that your video is only being on the screen.
Yeah, I think I ended my sharing. I'll do that
Yeah.
in just a moment. So I want to read out the land acknowledgement. I make this presentation from Beaverton, Oregon, and I would like to express my gratitude to the Tualatin peoples whose lands that I am living on right now, engaging in this work. I'm a student of Oregon State
Oregon, and I
University,
would like to
Corvallis.
express my
It's located
gratitude
on the
to
traditional
the
homeland
Tualatin.
of the Calapooya people. Following the Willamette Valley Treaty of 1855, the Calapooya people were forcibly removed to reservations in western Oregon. Today, living descendants of these people are part of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians. Um, I don't know how to go back to presenting my screen because I think there is another. Okay. Okay. Another quick note. So please save your questions for the end of the presentation. You may post them in the chat box or as directed by the moderator. And if at any point in the presentation you want to get back to my presentation being full screen, you can hover around the icon and you'll see a pin option where you can click on it and you can get back to having my presentation full screen. So today I'm going to be looking at and engaging with talking about healing through food, and the ways in which immigrant communities, and more specifically South Asian, Indian, specifically Indian immigrant communities in living in the US, look towards their native foods and native cuisine and the act of cooking to create and maintain community with each other within the diaspora. So food evokes a complex set of emotions about home, longing, and belonging. Quoting Anita Manur, who has theorized extensively about the experiences of cooking and the ways in which it enables the creation of kinship and community within diasporic South Asian communities. And so I'm looking at how during the COVID-19 pandemic right now, where people are living in self-isolation, people are not able to travel outside their homes, and they're not able to leave the United States and other parts of the world and go back visiting family, the ways in which they're sharing cooking with their families and cooking in community, and the ways it's helping them connect with each other and form connections with their homelands at a time when they cannot physically travel. And so I also look at how by doing this, we are all engaging in healing ourselves from the trauma of the pandemic, and mutually healing each other through cooking and forming connections with each other. And so during the pandemic, I see us engaging in this practice and the ways we are also promoting a kind of healing justice from the devastating effects of COVID-19, where we are cooking not only with our families, we are cooking our family recipes, our ancestral recipes, flavors from home, and also the ways in which volunteers and the larger community are engaging in mutual aid work. By cooking for the larger community and providing aid to those in need at this time, who are suffering from financial and emotional hardships because of the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. And finally, I'm also looking at how how the social media has emerged as so important at this time, when we are sharing our experiences and our feelings through social media, and how food, posting about food and sharing recipes with each other is also enabling, the building of a virtual community during this time. I'll be using healing praxis, the terms healing praxis, kinship, and kinship formation through this presentation. So the way I define healing praxis is, like I mentioned earlier, immigrant communities are practicing, have historically, brought flavors from home and spices when we travel and move to another place, and the way we, try to recreate those recipes in a different place, where the immediate surroundings are completely different, and we experience, cultural shock, so to speak, and the way we look at the culinary as, a side to that has this, when the larger community practices this, it transforms it into a kind of healing practice. And I also argue that, several scholars before me, who theorized about the larger, broader, diasporic communities, have also argued that, cooking creates a form of kinship. And so I'm looking at more specifically during this pandemic the importance of that and how it's creating these kinships around us, and how there is an emergent space, an alternative space, which is not necessarily understood by the white supremacist heteropatriarchy, which sort of looks at us as foreign, which doesn't entirely accept or reject us altogether. And looking at relationships that emerge from this type of care work through cooking and community aid networks, and the way they are all enabling the formation of kinship and a larger kinship network in order to negotiate our experiences at this time. So to give you a little bit of background about the number of immigrants living in the United States. As you can see in this graph, as of this year, nearly 20% of the population in the US is composed of immigrants. And the flow of immigrants from, more specifically, if you look at the chart on the right side, from the East and Southeast Asian countries it has been steadily increasing from the 90s up to 2017. And so between 2010 and 17 alone, there has been a numerical increase of nearly 47% in number of people immigrating and settling in the United States. So this is sort of helpful in thinking about the number of people living here right now, and and gives us sort of a broader context to think about these kinship formations. Dr. Shaw touched on this yesterday, but there's been heightened anti-Asian racism right now and xenophobia because of COVID-19, not only in the United States, but in other parts of the world, where thousands of, incidents of racist hate and bias have been reported. And Stop AIPI Hate, which is Stop Asian American Pacific Islander Hate, which is a reporting center which was started for this purpose by a number of Asian American coalitions and groups. They've reported nearly 1,900 cases of racist hate and bias crime. And these, incidents include verbal abuse, physical assault, different types of civil rights violations, including workplace discrimination, being physically barred from public spaces, restaurants or transportation, and verbal abuse and harassment is sort of the highest in this, which is 69.3%, and also shunning of people is 22.4%, and women stand a disproportionately higher chance of getting being at the receiving end of harassment and abuse. And elderly people are another big chunk in this rhetoric of anti-Asian racism at this time, and along with the COVID, the direct abuse because of COVID-19, there is also this rapidly changing landscape when it comes to immigration policy. And a lot of you would have, who are probably following the news must be reading about, the ways like the US Department and the US State Department is, and the government is changing its visa policies rapidly on a day-to-day basis. And it's led to a lot of uncertainty for immigrant communities. So, for example, in March, the U.S. State Department shut down a number of its offices around the world, creating a huge backlog of, a number of people, who are trying to travel here to visit family, you visit their kids, coming to study, coming to work, and then, under the CARES Act or the, Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security Act, the stimulus checks that were distributed for economic hardship were, people who were considered non-resident aliens, which is predominantly, immigrant students and workers here, were denied those benefits. And at a time when they needed even more, specifically because they lost immigration status or they were followed by their companies. And so, losing a visa status means losing a job, and vice versa. Losing a job means losing your visa status, right? And at, given at such a time that because of the travel ban, nobody's able to travel home, or And this has also impacted like visitors who came here on a visitor or a tourist visa, which has a time limit. They're not able to get back and reunite with their families because of the travel bans. And they end up overstaying and violating visa policies, which jeopardizes their future visits to the United States as well. And then federal funding is another issue where the Immigration Service Office and the Homeland Security Office is unable to get federal funding, emergency funding from the Congress because it stands to lose a lot of its employees, which also has a lot of consequences for our community because of how much time it is likely to take by the time a lot of people receive their approval or outcome for whatever they're expecting, and the various papers and the documents that they're working on. So we are seeing how a number of these policies right now, as a result of the pandemic, directly and indirectly, is affecting the immigrant communities. And so, talking a little bit more about, the positionality of, immigrant communities of color, the racial and social formations of our communities here are often seen as outside, the boundaries of, what is seen as admissible within the white supremacist heteropatriarchy. So as we saw earlier, like through immigration policies and through these various, regulations, the US state sort of, provides us with rights, enfranchisement, and includes us in a lot of things. But at the same time, it also, providing us with civil rights, but by way of doing that, it is also indirectly holding us, using its domination and using its state's power by regulating our movements, not only within the boundaries, but also in a lot of ways, outside the boundary. And so our communities, in a lot of ways, are seen and unseen at the same time. So we are visible and invisible at the same time. And against our communities, the U.S. settler state often uses its police might, its military might, and using a lot of border control policies, it sort of regulates our bodies, regulates us using in the name of self-protection and national security. And this is particularly true for a lot of subgroups within the immigrant communities, specifically talking about Muslim communities and those from Muslim majority countries, as we have seen in a lot of cases in the more recent past. So the South Asian diaspora sort of occupies this in-between, this liminal position within the US nation state, right? And so we are impacted by these state forces, which include us and exclude us at the same time, using the state and social laws that we are subjected to in our day-to-day basis, and even more at this time of COVID-19. And so scholar Gayatri Gopinath has written about, how these racial formations and social formations are out of place and out of time. And our cultural differences, bringing the focus back to talking about food, our cultural differences, in the form of, the way we, form connections to our home using food. And also at the same time, food, in a lot of ways makes us, palatable, right? And so, a lot of our conversations surround food, right? So, talking about Indian food and talking about, stereotypical things like Indian curry, which a lot of people aren't aware is not this homogeneous term which stands for everything we cook in our cuisine, right? So we see the ways in which, these cultural differences make us different, but at the same time, these, the ways raciality sort of operates through these differences to enable our othering, to enable these categories of difference to, seem more normal, and in a lot of ways justify violence against immigrant bodies of color. And so I look at these kinship networks, right, as our way of healing from these things, and our way of finding ourselves, and our way of like forming and shaping our identities within these hostile environments. And so by engaging in these healing activities, we are messing with and confusing the rigid racial, cultural and national borders, to quote another scholar, Anita Manur. And so as a transition, or from talking about these grand immigration policies, and the ways in which it is continuing to personally affect a lot of us, I offer this quote by Silva because it resonates with me. It always has, in a lot of ways, how talking about how we carry a part of ourselves and a part of our home, a part of our memory with us when we move to another place. So I'm just going to read this out to you all. An immigrant travels with luggage of several kinds. There are suitcases packed with practical goods and memorabilia. For example, a handwritten cookbook, a Lefse rolling pin, or a Jeffilite fish pot, such as those in the museum on Ellis Island. And there is the baggage carried only in the mind, which contains flavors, aromas, and images from the kitchens of homeland and family. So as a queer diasporic immigrant woman of color, I've lived in the US for close to 6 years, and in a lot of ways, the recreation of family recipes has been an important part of my recreating home for me here. So be it making rasam, which is a tomato soup with spices and yellow lentils tempered with clarified butter and cilantro. I know a lot of you know what it is, but this is for those who aren't very familiar with it. And several other dishes. And so each time I recreate these dishes in my kitchen, I'm connecting with my home, I'm connecting with my people and my land. And I see myself getting in touch with who I am, and the ancestors before me from whom these recipes were passed down through my family, and cooking traditional recipes and making these connections with my people is I see this as its own kind of activism, activism for survival, and providing this sort of script for immigrant social justice work through the bringing together of all our communities over here. So we continue to see how food is so central to our existence and central to our lives as immigrants, right? So in my own personal experience, I travel to India almost every summer with my child, and it's an opportunity for me to meet our families and people. But travel bans in place right now, and complications with immigration policy are preventing a lot of us from doing this, right? And so this is stemming from a very personal place where I find myself looking to fill these voids, right, of not being able to see my people by this restriction, filling this void by cooking, and by thinking of these recipes, thinking of my grandmother, thinking of my mother, and my aunts, and all the women from whom I've learned and who made me who I am. And so and a lot of us, I'm sure, within this community are going through something similar. And so we see how we are creating these kinships, right, with each other and with our ancestors, and engaging in self-healing and mutual healing. And that brings me also to how domestic work, right, and care work, and given this time when a lot of the work we do is from home, right, and so how domestic labor is so gendered, and women unfortunately are being made to bear a disproportionate amount of this work of caregiving, of cooking, and at the same time, managing a career, managing an education, and a lot of that work is being done disproportionately by women. And so, I think about this a lot, and I also, think about reflecting on experiences of how the capitalist institution continues to sustain itself by depending on this work, although we don't necessarily see domestic work and career as connected, or having consequences on each other. But the capitalist institution, in fact, sustains itself by falling back on this, unpaid free labor performed by women, and this, and culinary labor is a big part of that work, which is like life sustaining, which is community sustaining, and even more at this time, and the ways in which it's, rendered invisible within the, the capitalist economy. So within this climate, anti-immigrant, climate of anti-immigrant, anti-Asian, and gendered rhetoric at this time, cooking is helping diasporic immigrant communities of color to create and maintain connections and kinship with each other. And there are a number of examples of this, right? Cooking and cooking Indian food, eating that food along with my community of other Indian students during the early time that I moved was a profoundly healing experience for me in the first few months, where I was experiencing a lot of homesickness. A simple visit to the Indian grocery store, walking between the various aisles stocked with lentil, flour, spices, agarbatti or incense sticks and snacks, and other items, makes you feel like you're not that far away from home. And so I see this as a way in which we are communicating with each other through our shopping choices, right? Through purchases, through our consumption of food, through cooking. And so within the larger American culture, these communications become important pieces, important parts of, and important things that play sort of a central role in our upholding a sense of unity with each other and community, and a site of, collective healing, when the larger culture or society neither completely accepts us nor rejects us. And then, going on to talking about mutual aid, right? And the way in which mutual aid is creating these kinship networks. So mutual aid is basically when people and communities exchange resources. So it can be, a group or a community sharing resources with another community, or an individual volunteer sharing resources or services with other people who are in need, right? And it is sort of a participation-based approach where people practice care. People practice love, care, and healing by providing food, right? By providing medicines or medical care, or like running errands, like going to the grocery store, or helping around the house. And so a lot of mutual aid work has historically taken place during times of natural calamities like hurricanes, and during times of previous pandemics. And it's been practiced in a lot of forms and ways around the world in a lot of societies during times of need. So during the time of COVID-19, there's a lot of volunteers cooking home-cooked meals with their own with things from their own pantry, things from their own hands, based on the needs of other communities. And so, it's a type of, so this type of mutual aid is, cooking is also at the center of a lot of this mutual aid work, and catering to a lot of immigrant communities, especially undocumented immigrant communities who are unable to, who were laid off jobs, who are in tremendous economic distress and emotional distress, not being able to afford food for their families. So it's, so this community provided, community-based, community-provided care is being practiced now during the pandemic, and also in light of the Black Lives Movement that's also happening right now. And so people are doing grocery runs for people with immunocompromised conditions, for older people who are more vulnerable to COVID-19, for example. And there's like running Google documents with like thousands and thousands of resources that are listed, where people can connect with each other based on what they need. So food is again a prominent part of this mutual aid work, and where volunteers are being matched with people in need, and like cooking and food is again at the center of this. And so this is sort of creating a lot of kinship networks, which are not necessarily it's not necessarily possible to contain them within our understandings of biological or family kinship, and how this is forming these broad networks and huge networks through care and healing work. So I just want to end with this beautiful quote that I look up to a lot. This is by Joy Harjo. So Joy Harjo is an international lessons in geography, economics, culture, and colonization. These utensils tell a story of materiality and socialization. Salt is about migrations. Songs are born here to grow food and children. We sing stories to acknowledge and grow love. Take the blues, for instance. So, thinking about the material histories of everything that's there in our kitchen and the way we are consciously and unconsciously trying to think of our own histories, our own, personal family histories, and the broader histories associated with those materials and material objects in our own kitchen, right? So I just wanted to leave you all with this quote, and so this is a list of works cited that I drew upon during this presentation. And if anyone is interested in any of these readings or resources, I'm happy to share this list with the moderator. Thank you.
Hi, Sharda.
Hi.
Yeah, that was an elaborate, interesting presentation, which was really mind-kindling, like how food could really replace an emotional longing to be back home. That was a nice presentation, I should say. So I think if any of you participants have anything to ask, we will have an interactive session open. The floor is open for you all. Anybody coming up?
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah. So I am Jayakumar, an assistant professor from Periyar University, Salem, Tamil Nadu.
Nice to meet you. Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a nice presentation. It's quite interesting. I was actually listening with my family, my wife, my child, and all. Quite interesting. I have actually a small doubt here that when we go abroad, we carry, as you have actually said, we carry material things which is connected to our culture, and in our mind, we carry so many identities of ourselves, right? Ourselves, our community, and all those stuff. So in this context, is it actually the reason we are finding it very difficult to adjust to the indigenous people of the country where we have immigrated? And it creates actually a sort of resistance between people who have come down and they are actually still holding on to their identity, not actually absorbing the land's community where they have landed. Okay, so is it actually creating that kind of an identity rift, the cause for this kind of discrimination, these kind of problems that is happening around the world?
So do you mean, so you said indigenous people. So what did you mean? Do you mean, the indigenous people, like Native American people in the United States? Is that what you're trying to say?
No, I'm saying that, see, now actually there is no concept of indigenous people there in America because whites have actually taken over that identity.
Yes.
Right. Mm-hmm. So what happens is white feel that that is their actually birth land of birth, and it is their country. They are actually that red Indians, that old history and all those things are all forgotten. Okay. So now I am actually saying, thinking that, so once actually the Asian Americans or people from Asia or from any other country who's actually landing in America, rather than actually adjusting and adapting to the existing, practices, culture, custom, and food, they actually still hold on to this baggage. Maybe they might actually change the baggage of material things, but in their mind, still they are longing for their own motherland, their own native culture, their own identity. As you were actually saying that we had that you had that kind of homesickness, right? So I felt good just going through the aisles of this departmental store and meeting a couple of students there. So what happens is still, it is actually the kind of resistance that we are actually still having to adapt to the new country and its culture, which creates a rift between the native people, and they still see that, okay, immigrants are the other, and we are we. So this kind of a conflict arises because of this kind of a perception.
So I agree with you saying that, like, the difference that they see, and the fact that, like, we are our identities are so strong when we come here, right? And so that's definitely a central part of the way that the ways in which we are viewed as very different, right? The ways in which we are viewed as people who will not assimilate, and people who will not assimilating, essentially, according to me, in my own personal experience at least, assimilating is basically it comes at the expense of you sacrificing who you are, right?
Yes.
So assimilating, especially like you rightly mentioned, but this is a settler colonial land, right? So indigenous people were completely killed off and murdered by the white people, and they stole this land, right, from the indigenous people. So this is stolen land, right? So and so when we when the culture, American culture, gets defined, it's often conflated with white culture, with whiteness, right? So whiteness is becoming this invisible norm which everybody is supposed to follow, right? And so I think that although we see this holding on to our identity as a weakness, I would argue that it is our strength. I would argue that it is important for us to do it in order to hold on to our culture, because a lot of our culture in our own land in India, which was colonized for 250 years, a lot of our culture is completely like lost because of British colonization. So although we look at colonization as this, and a lot of us look at it as this, positive, glorious thing, which gave us a lot of things, right, like English and railways and all those things, but it has murdered a lot of our culture, and it has killed off and made us forget a lot of things about who we are. So I think that the fact that we are practicing our own things and our own traditions on wherever we are is a very strong part of that work that needs to happen for us to go back to who we were before we were colonized, right? And because a lot of that is lost. So I think that that's in fact a strength, and the fact that we're doing that, specifically talking about through food, is our way of healing from those violences, from healing from those losses. It's easy for, I'm sorry,
So I just actually want to say that, okay, one part of your argument to justifying to hold on to the identity is actually still fine. I agree to that, but actually I have a different view that Britishers have come and actually demolished our culture or our tradition, because our culture is known for sati, our culture is known for dowry, and our culture is known for Thagism. So many other things also we had as our Indian culture, but actually they have come and stopped that. So there are both the good things and bad things that has happened because of colonization. I have actually a different view.
I mean, I think that's like a really
You are sitting there and talking in English.
I agree with you. Thagism is, in fact, was a consequence of colonial laws. The Criminal Tribes Act, I don't remember the year, to be honest, but the Criminal Tribes Act was put in place because a lot of our community structures and kinships were not British. The British couldn't understand it. They were like, this is weird. There are people who are non-binary. There are people who are not identified solely as men and women. There are people of other gender identities. This is just weird. And then they put this Criminal Tribes Act and like genocidally killed so many transgender people, many trans people, and they designated certain indigenous tribes as criminal. And the Thuggery has its root in those histories of the Criminal Tribes Act, which was a very colonial law that was put in place, right? So it is these stories that we need to bring back and see the ways colonization has devastated our culture.
So thank you so much.
Sharada.
Nice presentation.
Thanks.
Yeah, Sharada, it was nice presentation. I think you have to look into the chat box where two of them have put up the question and you can answer to that.
Let me see.
Sayana has a question.
I'm just trying to scroll back to the first one.
Just scroll back and see. Sayanidas, I think you can just come up with a question.
I found that.
Shraddha, you can hear me?
Yes, I can.
Shraddha.
Yeah, hi.
Hi. it was really nice, really interesting presentation. I do appreciate the work that you have doing. I just have a little bit of I just want to know more about it, because the food is gendered. Like you see, even in men in Western countries who take part in food, is sometimes the food which is more of male dominant kind of food. Like if it is a meat, I lived in Australia, so it's barbecue is male's domain. And then if it is the other kind of food, which is if it is done inside the kitchen, which is not outdoor barbecue, if it is a indoor kitchen, then it is women's domain. So there is a boundary compartmentalization of who cooks what. So I just think, like when you are just from the Department of Gender and Sexuality Studies, maybe you can just also look into how gendered food is. Because what you look through sociological interest of kinship, I'm a sociologist as well. So I have two questions on that part. One is like, do you think this young Indian diasporic women, are they engaging men in community or family kitchen during the COVID period? Like there is a lot of opportunities for them to be involved or making them involved. Are they trying to do it? Are they consciously taking an effort? If they are not doing it, why aren't they doing it? Why are they reinforcing kind of gender divide in the kitchen, whether it is an indoor or outdoor kitchen? And the second question is like what I had just asked you is about, let me just go down to get to see my second question. Yes.
Do you think moving access to food can end?
I think I have one more question.
Do you think moving access to food can
Anyway, you can just answer to it.
In the meanwhile, can I
I know.
ask a question?
Yeah, Shiny, you can wait for some time. Yeah,
Hello?
you can take your time. Sam, you can come up. Yeah, please come.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
You spoke about the cooking, and
Okay.
and I want to ask you, is there any special cooking cooking recipe in times of COVID-19? Is there any special recipe that the indigenous people, your people, cook there? Hello.
So I'll start with Chinese question. All right. So
yeah, Shraddha, I got my second question. You can just answer together. You can club together. Do you think healing practice through food can enforce non-normative gender equal kinship structure in India? So that is my, it's part of the first question, but it went down in the chat box because they were appreciating your presentation. So maybe, it's up to you to answer together or separately.
Yeah. So basically, I think that I agree with you. Like, so, I mean, you said food is gendered, right? So I'm guessing that like the act of cooking is gendered. The kitchen space is gendered, right? The domestic space is gendered. And I think that speaking specifically for the South Asian, diasporic community, the immigrant community, a lot of the folks who move here, right? So a lot of them are dependent spouses, right? So a lot of them are dependent spouses who often happen to move. They are women who often happen to move, leaving their lives and careers in India in order to support their husbands' careers in the US, right? So in a lot of ways, again, there is a lot of this immigration policy that comes in, where when they come here, there is these, a million restrictions on what they can do or what they cannot do, right? So they cannot pursue jobs, they cannot study. So they, the restrictive system like basically confines them to the space of the home, where they end up doing a lot of the domestic work and they end up taking up a lot of the cooking, right? So in a lot of ways, I think that it's a bunch of different factors that enforce this sort of like forced gendering of the cooking space and the work of cooking and the labor of cooking, right? to women, and it like women get burdened with a majority of it. And I think that personally, like in my own life, that's not the case. But I know a lot of cases, which is a mix of both, right? Where the other partner is participating, right now during the time of the pandemic when both people have a career or when one of them has a career. But I'm not familiar with a lot of people to make sort of like any generalized, comment on that. But I think I would imagine that there would be, a mixture of both, where both the partners are like pursuing a career, where in some cases, it might be the woman who's taking the disproportionate burden of doing all the cooking, but in some cases it could be more equitable or more equal. So I would imagine, I would hope, that it's a more, fair arrangement. But yeah, that's definitely something an important thing to think about. And Sam's question, could you remind me your question? I'm sorry, I
Yeah, I think it's quite reassuring what you have said. So I was just actually telling that whether this COVID, phase of lockdown and just staying at home could use this your concept of healing praxis as non-normative gender equal kinship structure. So I think you have answered that. So I don't think I just I don't disagree. Your answer tells my second question's answer. So there is a kind of equality or equal sharing of food and the labor of making food. Not about food, but labor of making food.
Yeah.
Thank you, Indu.
That's nice. I think Sam had a question. Are you there, Sam?
The question is, ma'am, in COVID-19 in Indian culture, they prepare some food like ginger with lemon and all. Is there any recipe in America that they prepare for the healing of the COVID-19?
You mean the infection itself, the virus?
Yeah.
Oh, I haven't heard of any personally. But I mean, the thing I hear people talking about mostly is, precautionary things with respect to like, safe, cleanliness or hygiene, or, how to, keep yourself clean and sanitized. And those are mostly the kinds of things that I'm hearing. But I don't think that recipe or cooking wise, I have heard anything specifically, because I think that in our cuisine, like in Indian cuisine, there is a bunch of different things that have been making the rounds, right? So I don't know if any of that is scientifically proven, but I would imagine that, for a regular talk, like we drink pepper rasam, right? So like there's a lot of our own traditional healing recipes like that, but specifically for COVID-19, I'm not sure. I don't think that I've heard of anything.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have another question in the chat box from Devjani Bora.
Narada, one second.
Yeah.
You can just stop sharing your screen and you can appear on the screen so that people will look at you answering. Your screen is still shared.
Okay. Sorry.
And there is a question by Satya Narayana that's about, have you researched in a gender perspective towards culinary healing? Who finds more psychological solace, the man or woman? So you can just and read that. Satya Narayana.
Have you researched that's what healing finds more? Like, okay. That's a very good question, and I mean, it's interesting to think about. So I'm still like, this is still a work in progress for me, and I'm in the process of learning all the whatever theory helps, right? In understanding culinary healing, and scholars that have come before me who have written about this, and in whatever reading that I've done so far, I have seen more examples with women's experiences, especially talking about diasporic women and diaspora, like mostly, in reflecting on the way cooking, food gets written about in films, in cultural productions, like not just films, but also books and short stories and novels, and the way food gets talked about in those works. Um, I mostly see, reflections of women's experiences, right? Women's experiences. And so, that's what I've seen so far. And I cannot immediately think of any examples of, people of other gender identities and their experiences, within this culinary healing process. Like, I don't think that personally I've come across that many examples. Mostly it's, and that again connects back to the way, like, cooking and culinary labor is so gendered already and always has been. And so I think that, it's something that definitely requires more work, exploring the experiences of other folks. Yeah.
Yeah. The next question is from Kavipriya. So I think you can scroll down. It's a very big question. As the quarantine progresses, a regressive social phenomena is occurring in the homes of professionals with the families. The gender imbalance has become evident in the dynamics of working couples with children, with women compensating for the time and tasks of home and child care. And as a result, the number of academic papers written by women has dropped significantly. This epistemic reality during the pandemic is being written mostly by men. How can this be happening in the 21st century?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. It's a very important thing to think about. And in fact, I mean, we've been talking about this, right, through this presentation, and Dr. Shaw also touched upon this yesterday, and about how, like, domestic labor is so gendered, and women are bearing the burden mostly of not just, balancing their career, but also taking care of kids and cooking and cleaning. And I would imagine the effect it has on the scholarly work that women are doing. And in fact, like, I mean, although this doesn't necessarily reflect my own personal experience, but I think as a diasporic woman who, this presentation in a lot of ways, talks to you about my own experiences, right? Like, why, this topic came about in my mind, and has to do in a lot of ways with this, larger process of the fact that, like, culinary labor is so gendered, and what that means for us as women academics, what that means for our work as scholars, and what does it mean, how is this going to impact, right? So with so many deadlines and so many things getting cancelled, and how do we find a way out for our, like, for our scholarship? And so I've personally been looking at, it brings me back to Joy Harjo's example in a lot of ways, like trying to, like, learn and read theory and history from what's around us, and sort of, like, looking at that, like, as a survival strategy. Like, what can we learn from what's around us? What can we learn from, within these circumstances? But definitely, these are, like, larger systemic problems, for sure. These are larger systemic problems where there is an unfair, advantage that, men have because of the patriarchy, that enables this, inequality to, like, thrive so much. And especially during this time when we are all sharing space with each other inside the home, and, like, thinking about these things on a day-to-day basis, that who does what work, right? And how that domestic labor, it's finally making all these conversations happen, which is, I think, also very, very important work, and hopefully will change things, shift things, and shift our thinking in the future.
Yeah, I think if any other participant has questions, they can come up, and we are nearing the end of the session. And there is a question from Dibhanjani Bora. Do you think that women who are living in families or with their partners have the luxury to have the experience of healing through cooking? And And do you think the experience of cooking has a parallaxis has a gender perspective?
Is if Devjani is here, could you say a little bit more about your question?
Yeah, Bora, please on your microphone and talk to her, please.
Am I audible? Actually, I am having a little bit of connectivity issues.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Actually, my question has already been addressed in the earlier responses to the other questions. What I wanted to know, it is not only related to the COVID situation. So, because you have said that cooking as healing praxis, so do you think women who are in the families or who are living with their partners, they can feel this whole experience of healing, because their work is always, housework is always considered as the invisible one. Whereas if we look at the COVID-19 situation as well, even if women are looking after all the household works, working women who are taking care of their children or other works as well, but when their partner, they want to share the housework, it becomes visible because they share those pictures in be it Instagram, Facebook. So how do you see the connection, cooking as healing praxis? So do you think there are gender perspectives in the regarding this experience of healing through cooking? So this is what I wanted to know.
Yeah, that's definitely something to think about. And I see your perspective, right? So in a lot of ways, I mean, there's a number of examples where women are forced and confined to just doing cooking, right, at the expense of like so many other things that they might want to pursue, or their passions, or things that they just want to do. And there is a number of, I think, examples within the patriarchy where women are relegated sort of to cooking, right, and cooking only. And we also see, and we've seen that through generations, right, in our communities. And so I think that what I'm the way I'm coming at this is, it has like two parts, right? So one part of it is thinking about the diasporic experience, I think, and how like not being surrounded by your community, by those languages. I think language is such a big part of it. So when you step outside your home, not being surrounded by Tamil or Hindi or whatever, like Kannada, Telugu, so many of our languages, like, and not having that familiarity, not having our people around us, and not having those sounds and those noises around us, and then like being in a place where you are different, right? So you are not seen as, I mean, you are not a local here, right? So basically, I think that like where I'm coming from is that like I mean, I'm looking at that, looking towards food as healing from those experiences, from those those longings that we experience after coming out. So but if we talk about like the gendered domestic spaces and the gendered kitchens in India, then definitely I think that you're completely, like, I'm completely on board with you, where you're saying that like if I'm tired of this, right, if this is all I'm doing, how can this heal me? That's definitely important to think about, and it's an interesting thing to think about. And I would imagine that we would need to like talk about that as something else and define it as something else for sure. But yeah, thanks for offering that. I think that's definitely something that I'll be thinking about as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. That's nice. That's nice, Sharda. Hi.
Has got a question.
Yeah, I think
how should the capital of diaspora combat COVID crisis? How you get connected and able to build trust, especially during lockdown, with the community? So if Premlata is here, I think they can pop up and make clear the question to Sharada.
Yeah, because we're running short of time actually.
Yeah, Sharada, is it okay that we'll continue for another 10 minutes because people
No
are
problem.
asking
I have
questions?
no problem.
That's
Yeah.
fine. Okay, then it's fine. Yeah.
Could you elaborate a little bit on the question?
Premlata, are you here?
I think she's not responding.
Okay, so I'll go on to the next question. Kalpana has got a question. What makes you to choose such topic? And you have done work in this topic. She wants to know whether you have done work on this topic.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I kind of touched on it earlier, but I think in a lot, I mean, this stemmed for me in March when we were just entering this crisis, right? And so that's when for me it sort of came up, and I started thinking about, like I started having these. I mean, I've always had a connection with food, like a lot of us do. Like every time I go to India, I have a suitcase full of sambar powder and rasam powder and so many spices that my mom sends. But I've never really thought about it as as anything significant in my life, right? So it's just the basic needs. It's like something that we need for sustenance, and that's all. And also in a lot of the conversations that we're having in the WGSS community here, we've been reflecting on a lot on what theory means, right? So what is theory? So the Western way of describing theory and is basically like something something that has been defined and described by like a straight white person, right? So that is theory, and we are supposed to read all our experiences, right, using those theories that have already been written by those people, right? But how we, I'm thinking about like how we can push back on that, because a lot of those theories are not necessarily, it's not possible for a lot of our communities of color, specifically colonized communities, to understand our experiences necessarily through those theories, right? So thinking, having that as the background, and thinking about how our own personal experiences as communities of color, as diasporic communities, other types of marginalized communities, as women, how can we understand our experiences and learn from the theory that stems up from everyday life, and how can we like read theory from there, and how can we theorize in our own ways, using our own culture and our own tradition. So using those conversations, having those conversations with my peers, and learning from them, and a lot of indigenous Native American communities in the US have found theory, produced theory, and read theory, created theory from their own experiences as their way of pushing back against like Western definitions of what theory is and what theory should be. So thinking about that, and thinking about like cooking itself, and all these objects that are around me, I started thinking about this topic, and I was like, what is this experience? What is this feeling? Right? Why am I longing for home? What is my mind trying to tell me, right? So just thinking about those things was basically what made me look for people the feminists who came before me, who also had these feelings and experiences, and sort of specifically going through this at the time of the pandemic made me sort of create all those connections. And yeah, I hope that answers your question. But
that's good. Explained wonderfully. And Noel has a question. Do you think that women are enjoying to cook food this generation as well as in the pandemic period?
Is it on the chat box?
Yeah, it's on the chat box. You can just scroll down and see.
Okay. Just looking at it. One second. Do you think women are enjoying? Well, I think it depends. I think that something that's very interesting to me is, I mean, I kind of very briefly talked about this, but not in depth by any means. But I've been thinking about like how building virtual community through social media, and how there's like a surge in the number of people sharing food related, recipe related posts, right? And so, thinking about like what is visible in that and what is not is something that I've been thinking about a lot. And I mean, the impression that we get from social media is, good, but it's also problematic in a lot of ways, right? Because it doesn't necessarily reflect reality. It doesn't necessarily, tell you like what is happening in the background in the broader context in a lot of ways, right? So the only way that we are looking at the world now and interacting with each other is through social media. And we see that, there is this trend where like women and men and other people with other gender identities are posting things on social media about like what they're cooking and during this pandemic period, and like how it's fun, right? And how it is having a healing effect for them, right? To cope at this time. But so I think that it's very like it's not possible to generalize whether women are necessarily enjoying cooking, like we answered in the previous question before. I think it depends on the context. I think it depends on their life and lived experience and how they go and how they do cooking and what memories and histories, experiences, and possibly traumas that they have when it comes to cooking. So I think that, I mean, I would imagine it would be like a variety of different experiences. But yeah, I guess, yeah, it's my response is sort of open-ended there, but yeah, definitely something to think about.
Yes, thank you, Sharada. I think we'll stop here because we are running out of time. And you have made a wonderful presentation professionally and very good. Hope Professor Susan and Whitney Archer would feel happy looking at a PhD scholar presenting so effectively. So indeed, we are also happy to have you here to share your knowledge with us. Zanita ma'am?
Yes, I see one Premalata's question, just last one.
Yes, ma'am.
Is 1 minute. Is cooking just healing process, or it is an enforced activity that women are overburdened during lockdown? I think that's a big question. Do you have, maybe you could give a short answer and we could steal some time.
Of course, this is a burden for the working women, so you can discuss about this. So I thought of asking it, but this is being posted, so I was quiet. You can continue.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that, like, thank you for the question. I think that we've kind of been, talking about how it's contextual and how it depends on where we are, I think, personally. And I think that, it can be healing. It can have a healing effect. And like, another person mentioned earlier that, like, isn't thinking about healing and going through healing, a luxury in a lot of ways? Sure, that's definitely possible. It's definitely possible based on the lived experience and, the personal experiences that people have with cooking. And so I think that I would definitely imagine that it can be a burden for a lot of women, where especially, systemic patriarchy confines them to doing just that, and how that labor in a lot of ways goes unrecognized. It is completely invisible. It is not seen as work, and how, like, it also sort of it is basically enabling doing that important labor, right, of so many other types of labor that are possible, and not just culinary labor, but also women's reproductive labor has also been talked about in that way, where it is at the center of, like, so many things, but it is not seen that way, but it's not acknowledged, or it's not respected, women's reproductive labor as doing important work, and sort of it is brushed off within patriarchy as something that defines the woman, right? So cooking and reproduction are not the only things that define women, right? So thinking about those things, and so how it just brings me back to what I said before. It can be definitely enforced.
Sorry for interrupting. Shouldn't we look it as a skill?
Sure, yeah.
Absolutely, skill, I believe, right? So it has to be learned by everyone. It has to be learned by everyone.
I think it is. Yeah, I think it is an important skill. I think it is an important skill, and it is important. It is life sustaining. It is community sustaining for sure, and it is a skill. Um, yeah, but it. I think that during this time, to be able to cook, to be able to afford to heal through cook is also a privilege because this is a time where hardships have hit like so many communities, right? And so I think that it is also important to acknowledge that a lot of us are also very privileged to even be able to cook, right, and have a meal on our table. So I also think about that a lot during this time. And so yeah.
I have two interesting comments here. There is one Dr. S. Hermanth Unisa. She says, my son is feeling relaxed while cooking with enthusiasm, ma'am. Keep it up. Enjoy healing by cooking. That's very nice. Now, I see another beautiful quote here. It says, there's a Noel S. It says, it's healing the family members, I think, but not the one who's cooking in home. So I think that's the nail on the head, and that is the talk all about, right?
Thank you for offering that. Yeah.
So shall we? Anybody else? Maybe on the chat box. I think it's pretty. It's more than 10 minutes, and we've taken your time. Very nice. This is actually a bigger dimension of. Yeah, many of them have congratulated you for your nice session because, yes, it's so many minds who are thinking about this extra taxation being at home and trying to please everybody, but all the time being in the kitchen. So it is. But again, if it's all with happiness and shared activity, definitely the healing can be really wonderful. That is the point. That is the point. That we should all share it and take this time at lockdown to be more productive and healing. That's the nice way of talking about it, right? So, shall we do the honors, Kamalavini?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly thank Sharada for being part of us. So we were privileged to have you here as a resource person, and you have made us so comfortable by a way of presentation, so interactive. So my hearty congratulations. You have long way to go, and you have a very nice future because you have made it so clear in your presentation. And I also thank Professor Susan for introducing you to us because she was a point in meeting you. So thank you so much to Professor Susan and Sharada and our head of the department, Dr. Zenita Roslin. And above all, I would thank all the participants who have taken their time off and to come over here and participate in our webinar. And I also thank our department faculty members and staff members who are working so hard to meet out this technical crisis. We are also learning.
Yeah. And thanks to Manju, Dr. Manju Pushpam. So she's from the physical education department, but a good soul who's always with us, sharing her ideas.
Yes, there are also many other faculty members, ma'am. Suresh Babu sir, ma'am. So many are there, and if we have missed the names out, please do not take it
all
to the
the
heart.
fellow colleagues from Bharati University, thank you.
Thank you so much, and all the friends who have taken their time off throughout India and throughout the world. I think Sharada's friends are also here to take part in this.
She's not sure yet.
I don't know because there were so many people. I didn't scroll through them.
So thanks to all the participants. Yeah, thanks to all the participants.
Some more opportunities like this with more number of participants, with more number of inclusive participants.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Sharada. And we are sure that we'll take also Susan ma'am and Whitney Archer with us to conduct some more programs like this. And we are also planning for that. So get back to you in some other meeting. Thank you so much, Sharada, for making a good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's a privilege and an honor. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sharada. Thank you, Susan ma'am. Thank you, Kamalavini.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. So good day to you all. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.